Well, my nephew, soon to be Dr. Warren, we just finished session one talking about grief, and it was so awesome. We decided we needed to do part two, and now we're doing part two. So, again, for my listening audience, this is my nephew, Joseph Warren. He's a licensed clinical social worker, correct? Did I do that
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Right. With I can't
Yep.
believe almost 25 years of experience. I'm not going to claim 25 years for me. I'm just getting more seasoned. That's what I am. And in our first session,
That's
we were talking about grief, and you defined it for us. And we also talked about how it's more than just bereavement grief, as in loss of a life, loss of friends and family, and so on and so forth. And we also ended that session with a takeaway of how to begin to approach dealing with it. So that's three things, right? Quickly, let's do a summary. What is grief? Um, what's our takeaway for dealing with it? I thought, what's the other one? What is grief? And oh,
yeah.
your
So what was,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, what is
So yeah,
grief? Your takeaway, you gave us calm and then the breathing exercise. So we'll do those right quickly and then we'll go into part two.
sure. Yeah. So thank you again, Aunt Judy, for allowing me to come back for part two.
Oh, wait,
Grief
wait,
is
we better
emotional.
let me do this before we get to if people want to reach you, they can reach you at email address.
Sure. Sure. Warren Joe 508. So WARREN JOE 508 at gmail.com.
Okay, we'll have
So
to repeat that at the
Warren.
end.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
All right, let's do that quick summary of the three things and then we'll move into part two.
Sure. No problem. So yeah, grief is an emotional response to loss, particularly the death of a loved one, and it encompasses a range of feelings: sadness, anger, confusion. It can involve physiological symptoms, which is social withdrawal. We also talked about that grief is not necessarily um, geared or connected to a loss, but it could be a loss of a relationship, it could be loss of a job, it can relate to health, it can relate to change in situations. We also talked a little bit about the different types of grief. We talked a little bit about complicated grief, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, cumulative grief, hidden grief, and delayed grief. And then we ended about giving an acronym about how to deal with grief called CALM, CALM, which stands for come unto me, which means come unto me all your labor. That's from Matthew 11, Matthew 28. I'm sorry, Matthew 11, verses 28 to 30. A stands for ask, which is in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7. Leave, which is in Psalms 50, verses 22, which leave your burdens of the Lord. And then finally, M, which is move by faith and not by sight, which is Second Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. And when you begin to breathe, we use this as a breathing techniques where you breathe in through your nostrils, you hold for a certain amount of time, and then you breathe out. It comes from 478, but based on the individual, if breathing's difficulty, just practice intentional breathing. So breathing in and breathing out.
And the key
So
to
that's what we kind of cover.
And the key to breathing in is your stomach, your diaphragm
Yeah,
should,
your diet.
should expand. So if you put your hands
That's right.
on it as you're breathing in, your stomach should be going out, the diaphragm should be going out. And then when you exhale, your fingers should actually begin to come together and interlace because you're exhaling the breath that's in you, and you do it with an open mouth. Now, today or this part two, let's start talking about the differences in we're talking about men and women because we have both of them as listeners, and this is a topic of great importance to both genders. Let's talk about how they
Yeah.
differ in their expressions of grief and how their acceptance of loss differs. So, I mean, I think they're first cousin
That's right.
questions, but we'll see where they go.
Yeah. So one of the things I would want to just let everyone know is that if they're, and I'll send you the link later on, Judy, but there's a book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
It's a great book on the differences of emotions, how women and men are different, which I think would be really good for your listeners. So to begin with, when men deal with grief, they usually try to use strategies of distraction, with avoidance, or immersing themselves in work to deal with grief. While women often employ emotional processing through talking, sharing memories, and connecting others with support. Um, that's typical ways of doing men. Now, I want to make it very clear. This is a continuum. So all men and all women, right? We just want to make sure. But this is what research has showed that usually what happens. Women are just more emotionally connected. They have more of the EQ, which is the emotional intelligence, while men have the IQ and vice versa. But the problem is that we're finding is that society and cultural standards that we have doesn't allow men to express themselves, because if they do express themselves, they're considered to be weak or they're not strong enough. It's a cultural mind shift that needs to be changed. While women have been nurtured and grown that this is the way that you can express yourself and it's okay. So one of the things that I do as a male therapist is I let people know it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you can express the way that you want to express, but you have to be okay with the way that each person expresses themselves. And so this is very big. And then we'll move on to the next part is that when I work with veterans who deal with PTSD, they've been trained in their mindset, especially veterans, not to talk about it. Because if you talk about it, that means you don't know what to do with it. And that's not necessarily the case. So that's some of the coping mechanisms that are different between men and women.
I remember my late husband's job was exceedingly stressful for him, which made it exceedingly stressful for me. And
That's right.
and when he would come home, I would say to him, tell me about your day. And he said to me, I don't want to talk about it because when I talk about it, I feel like I am reliving it. And I
That's
have to
right.
admit that one of the mistakes, I don't know if it's a mistake, one of the options we women do use, elect, or choose when we're talking to our men about their stresses is that our personalities kick in. Now, my personality has some heavy, what we would call traditional masculine traits, which is I
Yes.
want to fix it. I'm not
Correct.
cuddly. You can't just come and tell me about your problem and I'll go, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'll cry with you a little bit. I mean, I'm a trained lawyer. Lawyers fix things, all right? You bring me your problems, and my job is to fix it, to deal with it for you, to take it off of your shoulders. And, you know, I miss Jim tremendously. And now I think about things that I would change in our relationship. And I wonder if
Yeah.
he would have talked to me. And I think he would have if I had been on the softer side, if I would have just let him vent about what had made his day so stressful. But that's not my temperament. That's not my personality. Hey, what can I say? So, for those of you all listening, for both genders, sometimes the best thing we can do for the person talking to us is to just listen. No suggestions, no
Yeah.
observations, no commentary, just the questions of, I get tired of people saying to me, I'm so sorry. I'm going like, why are you sorry? It didn't happen to you. And the answer, well, I'm sorry that that happened to you. Or actually, tell the truth, I'm glad that it happened to you and not me, but we're not going to go there. But it sounds so disingenuous, but it's something, I guess, that's emotionally comforting. Now we're quick to say, I'm sorry. And we're like, why are you sorry? What are you sorry
Yeah.
for? And what you're sorry for is that I'm sorry for you that you're having that kind of a day.
Yeah.
And that can be objective.
So, you know, that just took me on a whole nother. I'm gonna stay focused with you because it's your this is your interview, but I want to on record. I want to validate you and commend you for the vulnerability. And I gotta, as my daddy would say, be careful what you say. And Grandpa would say, don't put dirty laundry out on the line. So I'm gonna be very careful when I say this because it's recorded. But let me just say this on Judy. Um, the fact that you recognize that you can make changes is a most powerful step. I was not a fly in the home of the Hawkins home, but when we came to visit, Uncle Jim would see us in the door, He would give us a hug and he would leave, go get pizza, go get root beer, and we would sit in his den and we would watch TV together. He was a quiet force, but he was a safe force. And I can say and testify through your son Jason that even though you and Uncle Jim saw things differently, there's still love there. And you guys complemented each other in those different ways. Be that as it may, to the other point, you're absolutely right. Everyone sees things differently. And I'm not going to do it on a recording, but everyone is a product of their environment. And I don't know if you're ready, if your listeners know that coming from a family of 8 children, coming from a family, that's another topic you can share later, but that has a lot to do with the way that you are. And I can say, because my father says, that you guys are the closest. And my father was different than you and quite, vice versa. But Jason says it the best. If you want someone to get something done, if you want to know something about renting, if you want to get something, you go to Aunt Judy. If you want something, then you go. So I want to validate you and say, God made you who you are. And it's great that you're seeing that. And it's great that you're helping the listeners to understand that. But God made you who you are. And who you are is who you are. And last point, because I love you, and I don't care who hears this, is that with God, all things are possible. And God allows certain things to occur in your life, Aunt Judy, that is supposed to happen when they're supposed to happen. Not talking about grief now. I'm talking about my aunt now. Okay, I'm coming back to grief in a couple seconds, right? But I'm talking to you, Aunt Judy, because it's so important that, as Daddy says, Daddy believed in time release prayers. Remember him saying that?
Yeah.
So it's like you take medication, and when you take the medication, it's supposed to happen. He said God does things differently. And I want to let you know publicly that I love you, I support you, and as you're going through this season, know that if you had known better, you would have done better. And know that God can cover a multitude of hurt and pain, and then He can bring you to the place that you need to bring. So I got pushed on Judy, and now we're back to grief. But I want to let you know that because I don't want you to pass this moment to recognize that what you've gone through is going to help so many other people. And I love you. And so
I think the fact that I'm able to talk about this and I can feel the tears behind my eyes is part of my healing,
yes,
and part of my dealing with my grief, and part of working through so many losses. And
yes.
and that's part of why being in Tennessee is necessary.
Yeah.
But yeah, you call it calm. I call it a praise sandwich. And
Yes.
it's a series of texts that works for me. But I'm going to stop right now because I want to shift back to giving
I
our
know, right? We're gonna
listeners,
shift.
I want to shift back to giving our listeners um, uh, more real time examples of
Yes.
how we work through all of these losses. So grief covers losses. We are grieving losses that we've had, losses that we are experiencing, losses that we anticipate. And the CALM acronym works for all of them. It works for all of them. At some point, we've got to just
Yeah.
let it go, let
Let
it
it
go,
go.
let it go. All right. So, so the acceptance. So we know men tend to compartmentalize. They're very quick to compartmentalize. Sisters, that's why this has nothing to do with nothing, but I'm gonna just tell you this. This is why men can cheat on women, but they don't want the other woman. Uh, the other woman just serves a purpose, but under no circumstances do they want a divorce from their wife, whichever way we're putting it. And women don't see it that way. Women
Yeah.
believe that the vows are for exclusivity, being exclusive, and they don't see it that way. And that's where the head-on conflict comes.
Mm.
So men need to understand that women see it as being this is an exclusive relationship, and women need to understand that just because he cheated on you doesn't mean he doesn't love you. That's not how men think. But we're not going to talk about the differences between men like that. But I wanted to throw that out because that book is really important. Men and women do see things differently. And we were hardwired that way from in our value system from creation. God knew that women would be the ones who would birth and rear the children. We need to have a very in tune emotional intelligence because what's wrong with the baby? It's a newborn. It's a newborn. And I'll never forget when Jason was born in Tallahassee, we were there. We had just moved to Tallahassee. I had no one to call, but an older lady from the church that day had come by. And in the night when Jason was crying and he just cried and he just cried, I finally called her and said, I don't know what to do. And she said, while I was there visiting you today, I thought to myself that the baby had on too many clothes. He's hot. Take some of the clothing off. I took some of his clothing off, settled right down and went to sleep. So women have to have a keen emotional sense in order to figure out things that are not articulated and to understand things that are not that are not stated but clearly manifested. All right. So bottom line is, listeners, there is truly a difference between how men and women function, and it would do us good to accept that fact and spend time really trying to bring a happy relationship from it. The other book I would strongly recommend is The Five Languages of Love, because that again shows that our differences are for real. All right, so we've kind of, listeners, you got a lot of free information there for nothing. We're gonna go now and talk about the acceptance of loss between men and women. Let's look at that.
Sure. So we're gonna move that, but I want to also say this is for free as well too, that men and women have the different hormones, estrogen and testosterone. We all have that. It just matters of the increase or the amount in each person. We'll leave that alone. To answer the question, acceptance. Research shows that women may reach acceptance through emotional engagement, right? Men might struggle with emotional expression and may also seek practical ways to cope. And this is very true, but it's also like you gave an example, Judy. It's vice versa. I remember when Nurse and I got married, I was more of the EQ and Nurse was the IQ. And it was literally, she was the one running the show. And it was sort of like she was tired of always taking the lead and always being like she literally was saying, I want to stop and let you do that, right? And to your point about Jason, that's what happened to Noelle, my daughter. Like I was taking care of Noelle and she was crying and I didn't know what to do. Narissa comes home from work and she had a onesie on, right? And she's like, she's hot. And then I remember my dad visited and my dad said again, she's hot. But you have to have that, that little mindset. So that's very important, right? When we're looking at grief, there's 5 different levels of grief that you heard from Kubler-Ross, right? And in the 5 stages of grief, acceptance is one. Now, you already know, Judy, that it's not linear, right? So anger, grief, despair. But when you talk about acceptance, one of the things that's so important is that when you accept things, it means that there's a resolution. There is a time when you come together and realize this is where it's at. Well, let's be honest, Aunt Judy. You can accept one thing and then fall back. You can accept one thing and then fall back. It's a cycle. So just because you accept one thing, don't feel bad if something comes up and reignites where you have to accept again. There's a song that you listen to, because I'm a little younger, where Laura Harris says, I choose you again. I choose you again. I choose you again. Remember that song, Laura Harris? I choose you again. Yeah. Well, it's the same thing, right? You sometimes you have to remind yourself that even though you're going through difficult times, that even though you accepted it today, something can happen. You got to keep accepting. So I just want to say that's just for free.
Okay. Well, here's for free. Those of you who are listening, Kubler-Ross is denial. This didn't happen. Yes. Anger. This isn't fair. Bargaining. if she were back, I do so many things different. Depression, why go on? And then acceptance, things are going to be all right. So that's there. And um, oh, I know what the healing process is. For me, I know let's talk about us. Let's talk about a wound.
Yep.
Grief is a wound, and
That's
the
right.
scab can uh, I'm comparing it to our body's a wound. So a scab can grow over the actual site of the wound, a cut, for example, a puncture, but the tissue under the skin has not healed. And
Correct.
if you hit it just right, the blood's going to just burst out, pushing off the scab. And so I'm often reminding myself that I'm trying to heal from the inside out. I am trying to go through all of this to get to the place where when you brush up against me, so that I can actually play Scrabble, because I just love playing Scrabble, but I don't need to stay up all Saturday night playing Scrabble. That's the intemperance of it. That's the intemperance.
That's it.
And that Scrabble is no longer something I do to remember and to connect with Jen. It's something I do because I just love it. I'm gonna be honest with you. I just love Scrabble. That's my addiction. As Jason would
Yeah.
say, if that's the only addiction I got, I'm okay. We can work with that.
Yeah.
All right.
So to that point, Aunt Judy, just want to let you know is that when we talk about grief, and I want your listeners to know that there's a difference between recovery and there's a difference between healing. And when you look at the words, those two words, it's very, very powerful because a lot of times people just want to recover and move on. And they don't realize that the healing takes sometimes a lifetime or sometimes longer than the recovery. And that's something that people need to recognize that, and because I do grief work, that for someone to say that you can just move on, no, you don't say that. You realize that it's a part of who you are. It's sort of like you take on something and it just makes you who you are. It's a new normal. And so I want to, talk about that. That's really, really important because guess what? You can be healed, recovered, and you walk by and the scab is open. Well, it may not bleed as strong as it did before, but it's still there. And we can never say that you are completely recovered, completely healed, because you don't know what life will bring. And anyone who's gone through loss or going through grief, it's unique to that individual. So I just want to share that with you because I want to make sure that when we talk about acceptance, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about healing, the words that we use when we're talking about people who are going through means a lot. Words have power. So just want to
So
drop
as
that
we
in there.
bring this session to a close, we want our listeners to take away a couple points. Number one, that men, male and female, process their losses and their coping skills differently. It's 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 the way we're wired. There can be many similarities in the way a female handles it that seems to be in society more masculine. And unfortunately for the masculine, the men guys, when they act like women with all the tears and the emotional part, society doesn't really appreciate them. And so men hold in a lot of their grief because they don't have a safe place from a societal point of view to express it. So let's acknowledge that. And you recommended the book. Men are from, is it, which has way? Women are
Yeah,
from
men from War.
Men's of Mars and Women's of
Yeah, yeah,
Venus. That's a book we
from
definitely
Venus.
want to read. And in our relationships, helping each other, paying attention to the five languages of love is a good book. The other thing is that we need to realize that, okay, everybody's going to have some grief. Everybody has some losses of some kind. That's life. If you don't have any losses, if you don't have any grief, you're probably on life support and you've lost your cognitive development. It's like, you know, that's just a part of living. So it's time for us to begin to actively engage our minds to deal with this. And so we've got Kubler-Ross's 5 steps again, which is denial, anger, bargaining, and depression, and then
Yeah, bargaining.
acceptance. And that you will float back and forth on that continuum. Today, you may have accepted it, and then something happens tomorrow, and you're just downright angry about it. You're just mad, like mad. and
That's right.
then this
Okay to be
difference
mad.
between recovery and healing. And that because we're each uniquely different, the process is peculiar to us and it's very mean spirited, insensitive, and disrespectful to say to someone who's in grief, just get over it. Just get over it. That is a disrespect for how they are emotionally wired. And healing is to get to the place where finally you have accepted it. And if I were to throw a spiritual comment on it, I would say the spiritual comment would probably be something like, um, my text has always been Romans 8:28. That's what I've doubled down on. All things work together for the good of them that love the Lord. It's going to work together for my good and to his glory. And while I don't understand it today, because if I did, God wouldn't be God, I can trust his love for me. I can rely upon him. And so when he says he knows the plans that he has for us, they're to prosper us and to bring us to a good end. While it doesn't look so right now, while it's really a dark season, I can trust him and I can give him praise and thanksgiving because he wouldn't have brought me to it if he wasn't going to see me through it. And quite frankly, sometimes, Lord, I wish you didn't have that kind of confidence in me. Just saying.
Can I mention one thing before we go? Because I know you're looking at the time, and I
Mhm.
want to say this because it just hit me. When I was going through a really difficult time on Judy, I met a pastor who said there's a ministry of presence where sometimes when you're dealing with someone who's going through grief, there's a time, like what Ecclesiastes says, a time for everything, right? But I want to tell your listeners that the best thing that you can do is have a ministry of presence where you're just there. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to do anything, you're just there. And because sometimes people may not be able to articulate what they're feeling, but if they know that you're there next to them and that you're trying to, it can do a lot of wonders. So I just want to share that because sometimes, in my experience, and we're going to end on this. You got the last word on Judy,
I got the last word. Go ahead.
but yeah, you have the last word though. But I want to say this too because I know your ministry is for women, but there's a lot of loss, like church loss or ministry loss, or things that they've gone through the church or through the religious experience, and then that their perspective of how people should relate to them has been tainted because people use spiritual words or spiritual that are not touching where they need. And Jesus was a perfect example. He knew when to speak, knew when to talk, he knew when to be quiet. He was perfect. And there's sometimes, as mommy would say, words can get in the way. And when we're looking at people who have church hurt, church grief, that when you're coming to them and you're just in their presence, that's what we should be doing with some of these individuals who are going through grief. Last word on Judy.
I think that applies not just to church hurt, but to all hurt. And I
Yeah.
love telling stories, illustrations. Jesus taught much by parables. A family had sustained a great loss for the purpose. I don't remember the details, so we'll just say there had been a terrible car accident and many members of the family had died. And a man came to the house and he said to, I guess, for this purpose, the surviving mother, wife, where are all the shoes?
Mm.
And he took all the shoes and he polished them and he buffed them and he made them perfect. And I tell that story to say that this idea of being present, there's always something you can do. And many times, the something you can do is what seems to be so insignificant and so unimportant. I guess I'll end on this. I have a friend in Tallahassee, The first death that I had to deal with was our mother's death. She started the dying in the family. Well, Jennifer died first, but then mother died in 2010. And she came to my house with a truckload of the paper things, the paper towels, the toilet tissues, the paper plates, the paper cups, the forks, the plastic forks and knives. And I realized that that's the perfect gift. That's the
Yeah.
perfect gift. And so I have modeled that when I go to the family, I come with paper goods because they're going to need them. They're going to need them. So listeners, we all experience grief. And sometimes the best way to deal with our grief is looking for someone else who's going through grief. And by encouraging them, we're encouraging ourselves. And be calm. Jesus says, come to him, CA, ask him for help, leave the problem there with him, and then move on in faith with a totally different shift of paradigm, looking at it from another way. Soon to be Dr. Warren, thank you so much for our time together today.
Thank you, Aunt Judy. Thank you for the invitation.
It's a
Thank
pleasure. And listeners, if you want to hear some more, then let us know in the chat. Respond to me. You can always talk to me at probably the best way to reach me is GRM. What am I? Judith Hawkins at grm2.net. I think that's what it is. It'll be in the credits that's getting ready to roll. Thank you. Be blessed. Bye.